I gotta stop staring at that. It's like, that says off air. Well, it's probably because we were off air, but
We're
now we're
now.
not.
Now we're on.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Marketing Momentum with Charles and Deborah. Hi, Charles.
Hi, Deb. Hi, everybody.
um, it's like, okay, what were you talking about today? No, so our topic, I didn't come up with some catchy phrase or something, but it's on like what to charge for services or even what to charge for products. So,
I think
rate
that's
card.
catchy enough.
There we go. That works. And I don't even, before we start that one, do you think there needs to be, and I'm not talking about just marketing momentum, but a differentiation as far as even approaching the topic of products versus services? Or do you think in general, it's basically the same concepts?
Yeah, I think the principles are the same. Um, most people, and not that it's always wrong. It really always feels like um, you're sort of not you personally, but people are in a by the time that they work as hard as they do to get something released, we're typically working all the way up until the day. And at that point, either pricing hits come sort of mid-level or last in the process. And it always feels like you're sort of looking at what everybody else is charging, and then you charge something in there. And I guess we'll talk about that. I'm not sure if that's always the right thing. Looking at what everybody else charges.
That's a good point. It's funny. I didn't plan this, that I was actually doing this before we come on this. I mean, maybe subconsciously it all relates, whatever, but I happen to have been putting together like some frequently asked questions for a ghostwriting service and so forth. So it relates. Although honestly, Charles, I didn't, it's like, oh, I'm going to go do this right before we do marketing momentum. So I have something to talk about in there. But what was it? Tell me, like, there were different questions that popped in my head. I put myself in the place of the consumer.
Yep.
Things like, don't pay for the service all at once. As much as a provider, I would like you to pay me 100%. That can put the person, the client in a bad position if they're purchasing a flyby. I mean, as far
Right.
as their best interest, hey, do the installment thing so you have a chance to build the trust. But there's something, this always happens. You say such brilliant things, Charles, and it's like there's something that relates, but then I have no idea what it was or what it is. But as far as pricing it according to like what other people are charging, one of the questions that I was answering in the frequently asked questions was as far as looking for that lowest price. And I actually answered it from our experience, Mike and my experience, where, 20 years ago or whatever, we were looking for, hey, what's the lowest price for this, the lowest price for that. But I don't think we've had a single time where unless it's like a product or, maybe there's something on sale, like a WordPress plugin or whatever, but for any major purchase that the lowest price has been the best option. It's almost like mid-range. You don't want to pay the most, but the
Right.
lowest, you kind of get what you pay for.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, and I guess, if I look at the tools that I use the most, they sort of cost what they cost, right? Um, I could pay more in some cases. Let's just take, for example, I know a lot of people use lead pages. I don't. I use WordPress base. I use Optimized Press personally, right? I don't do HTML. I'm okay at it, but I don't want to do it. And so it sort of costs what it costs, right? It's $97 for 3 sites as of the recording of today. But I could easily go and get a cloud-based service. I could go and I could get something like ClickFunnels. Um, those services cost more, right, to start with, and they sort of do some of the same things, but the fact that that service was priced what it was did not impact me getting it, right? And I guess it's
Right.
been at that price for so long. um I had it in my brain that, okay, when I'm ready, I gotta go and I gotta have this to go get it. It wasn't so much that it was on sale, wasn't even that it was cheaper than the other ones. It was that I knew I needed this one. And so I guess, um if you're doing all the other marketing stuff, like, sort of making the USP, evident, visible,
Mhm.
sort of making sure that people understand what it is, whether it's a product or service that you offer that they can't get elsewhere, right? Because I guess that's really the thing. Is there something in whatever the offer is that because even the bonus stuff, right? I think that kind of moves, that sort of moves the what I call the people who are going to purchase on the first day. I mean, early adopters. That sort of moves them. But then there are those people who sort of say, okay, you know what? This is the thing I need. They're not going to be moved by bonuses per se. They're going to be moved by whether or not this fits what I do. And if you make clear all of those things that you do that other people do not, right? What that I can get those things in my brain, and when I'm ready, I buy them. And so price is not the overriding concern. And I guess I mean, I don't know if that's just me or if that's other people too.
No, I think you're, and it's funny because again, I'm actually glad that I sat down these frequently asked questions because there's so many things that you're saying. It's like, wow, yeah, I answered that question. I answered them honestly, like I said, as it relates to the service that I'm providing ghostwriting. But there are so many other components beyond the price. There's a reputation. I mean, and I like how you said it's like, what do you actually need? Because I've had cases. I like doing HTML. I know I'm a geek, but I'm not going to go if I look at something and says, oh, no coding necessary, all the red flags go off because not
Mhm.
because I absolutely have to do coding, but if I'm paying $300 for something because there's no coding necessary, it's probably not a good fit for me because I'd rather pay $25 even if I have to do coding because coding's not a problem for me. But for someone else who doesn't want to do coding, $300 may be a bargain because now they don't have to touch HTML or anything else. So
Right,
that's a
right.
really good point. Evaluate what you're good at or what you need versus what you already have covered.
Yeah, I think it does come back down to, again, those, like, one of the fundamentals, right, which is USP. It's got to be something, number one, that matters to me, the buyer, and number two, it's got to be something that's unique to you, the seller. So in other words, I can't get this anyplace else in the way you deliver it, and it matters to me. So whatever that is, that means then that the price does not matter as much, right? And for me, it was, okay, here's an easy to use, it's a visual page builder that I can create something professional on WordPress, right? All of those things together. I'm sure there are other things. I'm sure that there are, cheaper versions, but
My dog doesn't like what you know. Sorry.
the dog doesn't like WordPress.
Sorry, you can just keep your opinion yourself. Anyway.
Didn't like
Sorry.
WordPress.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
But yeah, you were
um,
saying so you can find it cheaper somewhere else. By the way, I love what you do as far as your sales pages. If there's anyone I want to be like, it's you, Charles.
I appreciate that. Yeah, but a lot of it's optimized press, and I waited a long time, right? I waited a long time. I suffered through trying to do HTML, didn't do a great job of it. Bought some other things, and it wasn't even that. Um, and I guess I'll just go ahead and just name Lead Pages. Lead Pages is fantastic for some people. For me, there was a degree of sameness that I could not get around. So in other words, I do something with a template because I'm not necessarily all that, let's say, artistic. And what I could do with that looked like somebody else's template, right? So
Cookie
it looked,
cutter. That
yeah, it really looked like, oh man, somebody knew then Charles got Lead Pages, right? And so I just did not like that. And again, but that's individual to me because some people can get that thing and they can make it sing, so to speak, right? I just could not.
and I feel like I'm doing this on purpose. I'm not, but I keep mentioning these frequently asked questions. But I look at all these sales pages and I'm thinking I don't want to go out and copy someone's sales page for what I'm offering. And then I end up it's like, okay, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. I haven't offered something because I'm not sure exactly what I want to do with the sales page. That is just not my forte.
Mhm.
I have other talents and that's not one of them. But today I got this free plugin for the frequently asked questions, and all of a sudden it was like that works because it can actually serve as sort of a sales page for people who are not media driven but just want to get the facts, like, okay, what are you going to write for me as a
Right.
ghostwriter? Because it's actually it's expandable accordion, the whole thing. It's giving answers to all these questions, and I thought, hey, I can actually get something up and running as a pseudo sales page, and I can always improve on it later, but finally something that doesn't look like what everyone else has, and it's actually my words explaining the service. So yeah, I think sometimes you just find something that clicks, that works for you.
And everything is getting something up and running, right? And like I said, even if something is very good, if I spend all day because of all the features, because of how cool it is, or I spend all day watching tutorials, or I spend all day in user forums, I mean that doesn't help me, right? It doesn't help me if I got to get some if what I do depends on getting a sales. We'll just use the example of getting a sales page because not everybody has to do a sales page. But if it relies on me getting a sales page done, getting a delivery page done, getting something that will um, take care of the delivery process, then I sort of have to have things that are automatic that I sort of know what to work with. It's interesting. I was talking to someone, and you know, everybody watches these debates on Facebook, and so there's a debate on Facebook about, well, should you do Warrior Plus? Should you do JV Zoo? Should you do I don't know, one of the other ones, ClickBank, Zaxa, and so I thought about that because at the beginning of the year, I was trying to figure out, well, do I want to do one over the other one? And I guess, what the question really came back down to is, what could I do over and over again? And the one that I chose, some people feel like it's overly complex, but part of the function of that is, I've used that over and over enough, so now it's no longer complex. If I would just kind of make the decision based on what I have to do the first time, like one time, then everything else is easier, right? But now, for me to switch would be harder than to use what's difficult for other people. If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. I was thinking of as far as when I first started doing podcasts, the they're different. I'm not going to name names right now. Maybe I'll put that in an article attached to this, but and I should because I'm an affiliate of one of them. But that's one of the reasons why I'm not going to mention it. But there were other services that were easier to use, but I
Yep.
didn't like a lack of features. So the one that I chose was actually just a little bit complicated. When it's gotten a lot better, but when I first started using it, the same thing as what you said. It's like, all right, so I made almost like a cheat sheet that I need to do this, 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 and that included production aspects. And here's where you export the audio, and
Right.
we do all this. Michael and I, all the sound engineering things.
Right.
We do way more than we're supposed to do or whatever. But it became a checklist. Once I did that, it didn't make any sense to go use a quote unquote, like you said, an easier one if I already had a system that worked with the more difficult one because it was just repeating. What is it? Rinse and repeat.
Yeah. I mean, and you bring up a good point. I mean, um, I did, and I may even go back to doing, a local audio podcast, right? And I've been racking my brain about this, and I've been looking at Libsyn. I've been looking at, all these podcast hosts, and I thought to myself, well, am I going to do all this? That for me, I don't have a mic. I don't. I don't live with a guy that can do all these things. So and I've read everything online that says that, and I'll just go ahead and name names, right? At least the knock used to be that Blog Talk Radio, that the issue with it was the audio quality. That
Mm-hmm.
by the time you got it to iTunes, then the quality wasn't professional grade. But as I think about it, if I wait until I get professional grade quality, I'll never get anything up there, right? And so Blog Talk Radio, at least for me, not for you, but for me, is
You know me too well.
right. I mean, for me, I gotta just get, I gotta get it. I can interview somebody on there. They can call me on that line. It makes it easy for me, right? And I can live with the audio, right? But I know, but again, um, from a producer side, I know what it means that if somebody listens to it after they produce it and they just can't sleep because of how it sounds, right? And so and so I know that there are people who are like that, right? And I could go into, well, you just need to get something out there. I know that for some people, right, it's important to have that quality for them and for their people who are listening. So
That's a really good
um,
point because Blog Talk Radio does have some wonderful features. And I actually, that I didn't opt that way, but I did
right.
consider it probably 5 different times. Like, but this is such a cool feature. This is such a cool feature. I couldn't quite make that switch, but I can't blame anyone who does because there's some cool features.
Right. Yeah. And so I mean, have they changed over the years? I don't know, but I'm in some of the podcast groups on Facebook. I don't see anybody talking about it. I see everybody really talking about them better than I do. The Burberries and all the other places where you can
Mhm.
Podbean, all those places. and they're producing them themselves. And I see these big USB microphones on the desk, and I sometimes I even see these cardboard boxes with all the foam on the inside, and I think to myself, well,
Have you
man.
seen our studio in here? I think we have it blocked, but yeah, it's purple foam everywhere, literally everywhere in this room.
And I've got this headset, right? That's all and so because and again, that for me, um, half the battle is actually getting the guest, right? So and as it is at this point, I no longer have a problem with, not that I ever did, with the people that have all that stuff. At the same time, I do not feel a need to go and get it to compete with them on that level, right? So I feel like, even though, let's say, I'm in competition with other people for the attention of other people, I feel like I spend my time best that if I can get a good guest, like I can get a really good guest and I can ask really good questions and I can be really prepared, that I can overcome my lack of technical, whatever the case is, in my actual production.
And I think you're 100% right, because I've gotten to a point where it's like my perfectionism for that perfect sound becomes a bondage. It's like, okay, now I'm not doing anything because I require so much so that I'm not getting the job done. And I kind of miss the early days when there were less people out there, and I was gonna say none of us knew what we were doing anyway, so we just went out and got it done. Because now my own personal requirements for myself have become like OCD when it comes to podcasting, and that's not necessarily a fun place to be. It's more fun when podcasting is fun.
Right, right. Yeah,
And
I mean, and yeah, it is. But I guess, though, too, the, if you were talking to, if your audience is going to be, other podcasters, then you do have to have it, right? So it's kind of like, well, man, I don't like our quality, I'm not listening, that kind of thing. So if the audience, though, they're going to be kind of clued into that. See, my audience, if I do this, is going to be other people in Central PA.
mhm.
They could care. I mean, there might be some people who will say, I don't really like that. It literally sounds a little tinny, but I, most of the people are not really going to care. They're going to be trying to either listen in for the guest or whatever the content is.
What does that say? My dad used to say something about you can please all the people some of the time, or some of the people all the time, but not all the people all the time. And at some point, you got to just give it up and say, target your audience as best you can, but you're not going to be able to please everyone. I shouldn't ruin this story. I'm probably going to anyway, but this a friend of mine, she's a recent friend, but it's one of those things where I think I mentioned her cat, where I feel like I've known her for years and years. I think I've only known her for a couple of months, but she was telling, and it'll be on a podcast that we're releasing, so maybe if you don't mind, Charles, I might link it into this
Oh,
one.
yeah.
But she told a story, and it was just so brilliant. But she was talking about how she's looking out the window. She's a writer. She saw these squirrels playing, and she started writing something. It was, I don't know if it was in a neighborhood newsletter. I don't know all the details, but she wrote the story about the squirrels playing. And I guess her neighbor called her up and just tore her a new one. It was like, how can you talk so ill of your husband? She's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. But it's
Right,
like,
yeah.
I'm not writing in code about my husband and calling him a squirrel.
Right,
I'm really
yeah.
writing about squirrels. But I think about that, and she's so right, where it's like, no matter what you do, you could write about your pet, and somebody is going to mistake it that you're writing about your mother-in-law or something. And no, mother-in-law, I'm not. That's not in code or anything like that. But people are going to take it however they want to take it, even if it's incorrect.
Very interesting. I was listening to a radio show. Can't remember what it is. And the host was interviewing someone about what new graduates should be doing, in terms of trying to get jobs and trying to get opportunities. And she was counseling them on how to write a note to make a connection on LinkedIn, right? And it was very, very, very interesting. And so I guess the person advising him said, some people write too much when they initially connect with people. If you write a bunch of stuff, they're just going to say, okay, later
Yeah.
for right, later for this.
Exactly.
That's me, right? You're on overload. You're looking at this one. I'm not reading that one. So, and she was saying, she was counseling graduates, because I guess the temptation is always going to be, okay, I'm going to put everything in there that I possibly can, so that they they'll know I'm serious. And she was saying that's not necessarily the right
Don't.
approach. And she said two things. She said, you have to understand as a graduate, people don't read and people don't listen. So you've got to break it down into something that's like, really small, precise, and concise that gets the message across so that you're done. And I thought to myself, that really is kind of sort of where we are right now, right? And I don't know if it's Twitter, I don't know if it's Facebook, I don't know, whatever it is, but generally, just because you said something doesn't mean people got it, right? So so it's kind of like, you said squirrel, and the woman thought you were talking about, your husband,
Yeah.
right?
It's like,
Right, which basically meant maybe she missed the beginning, maybe she missed the
mhm.
first 5 minutes, but what's happening now is people are sort of catching in. They'll sort of kind of dial in the middle, right? They'll dial in the middle of what you're talking about and saying, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not."
Oh man, yeah, exactly. But you can't go around trying to base, and that's why my friend said she stopped writing because she was so afraid that she'd write the wrong thing and the neighbor would be upset with her. It's like you can't do that either because you can't base your whole entire life on how somebody else is going to interpret you.
And somebody is going to interpret you wrong, right? And sometimes it's just because they don't listen.
I had that. Charles, I think you know the full story. I think I've referenced it here, and I'm trying to be careful not to tell the full story because what is it if you can't say something nice? Don't say anything at all. But the event that happened on Facebook where somebody just like hauled out. Basically, it's like coming into my yard and slapping me, and it's like, what, huh? Where'd that come from? But I just found out this week that it did somebody. I know I'm using all these somebodies because I'm trying to really be careful and not pick anyone specifically. But person A gave me a slap, and then person B is saying, well, it's your fault for interacting with person A. When I said nothing, we're talking duct tape, said absolutely nothing. My husband did. My daughter did. My son did. Other people defended me, but I said absolutely nothing, which is what my grandma taught me. It's again,
Right.
can't say something nice. Don't say anything at all. Don't engage. Don't get in a fight. Well, I found out this week that person B basically says my fault for having a Facebook profile. And I was like, is that supposed to make me sad, angry, or like what the? I mean, okay, so I was breathing. That's what I did wrong. I was
Right.
breathing.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
But it just gets you thinking because no matter what you're doing, even if you don't have a Facebook profile, someone could cyberbully you, someone could attack you just because of whatever is going on in their life. And it's not anything you've done. Doesn't mean you're blameless, but I mean, you can't go around trying to predict what other people do.
Yeah, and I guess uh, we have talked about it on the show before. Nobody knows what it means now to live so much of our life in this digital world. Nobody really knows what that means. I think there's an appreciation, at least there was, for people who would do research and scholarship on what it means to live in the real world. Now, I don't know if we have people, right? Or do we have enough people who are doing the kind of research that tells us definitively, who have tested, who've done the studies to say, here's what this means when you are trying to make a point to someone in a social media context. Do we even know what that means? We know some people take it. There's so many layers to it. Some people take what they read as reality, even if the person didn't mean it as such. There's some people who mean to say something, but it doesn't quite come across right because they don't necessarily know how all of these other people are perceiving it and listening to it. And I think it's so wild because we don't really know what any of this means because all of this happens is what 1990, the 1990s.
Wow. I mean, it's 20 years now, and my kids would say, "Oh, that's a whole life." Well, probably because it is their whole lifetime. But it's like, yeah, you're right. It's in the scope of things. If you go back to the 1700s or whatever when our country was founded, which our country is pretty young, that's a very short period of time, and we still haven't figured it out. Which how could we be expected to figure it out in 20 years?
Right. Yeah. And you really do need that. You need academics, right, to study it, right? And I don't even know if we even have, the I don't know what it's called. If we have the ability to kind of read what an academic would say and then say, and then wait for the next study to try to figure out what it could mean, with a preponderance of these studies on issues around that, right? I don't know if we're there even as a society. We used to be there on other stuff, like in the real
Right.
world.
Right.
But I don't know if we're there now where if somebody, because everybody's an expert now on what happens online, right? So they said, well, that's not true because I have my own blog and podcast, and that's not the way.
It's like, yeah, okay. So definition of expert. I'm at my current course is actually a business course. It's in the area. I'm waiting for the shoe to drop because this is a doctorate, and I'm thinking this class is as easy. I wouldn't knock on wood or whatever. As easy as a bachelor. I'm like, it shouldn't be that easy. But hey, you know what? Thank you, Professor. I love it that it's this easy. But there was something that came up. We're reading a book, and yes, I should know the name of the book, and I should be able to recommend it, and I don't, except that it's written in it's one of the last names is H, one of the last names starts with B. But it was written in 2008, which is still in our realm of internet. But I'm guessing since it's a compilation of articles by other IO psychologists that some of these maybe somebody wrote it in, let's say, 1987. I don't know, but it was compiled in 2008. Well, anyway, jumping to the end, we have discussions in class. And one of the things that popped up was networking. Now, I'm going to give credit to the college. They've done a good job to say, hey, look at this book that was published in 2008, but also look at, for instance, the Society of IO Psychologists, and they've done this study, like you were kind of alluding to as far as research, study on social networking. So Capella is trying to, include all aspects. Here's the older information. Here's the newer information. Of course, we like newer research, but there's not that much of it. Anyway, so several people, I think there's one person, and I'm not trying to pick on peers, so I'm not naming names, but somebody posted something and there's like 3 responses, and I responded because we're supposed to discuss. Well, they define networking, and the definition of networking, according to the book, was either a telephone call or face-to-face interaction. And I'm reading this going, but what about LinkedIn? What about social networking?
Right, exactly.
Like, are we not, like, Charles, are we not, I mean, I don't call this face-to-face in the sense I'm not in Pennsylvania. So are we not talking right now?
Right. No, exactly.
And I brought that up not to, tried to present it, but it's like, I think we need to at least, even if you choose not to do social networking in your business as an IO psychologist, I think you need to at least acknowledge that it exists. So it's like, hey, in my model as a consultant, I'm not saying this, but somebody else, I'm not going to use social networking. And I had several people, Charles, I'm telling you, I felt like the minority. Like I felt like they were calling me a millennial, which is fine. I love millennials. I have kids that are millennials, but I can't be a millennial and have kids that are millennials over the same age. But it's like, did you guys miss something with Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn that it exists? Because they're like, oh, we're not using social networking because that's what millennials use. Okay.
Because I actually think, and I have been just kind of thinking about this, and just in a real sort of 50,000-foot kind of way. I don't have any influence over anybody, but I'm just thinking, if I was a Walden, if I was a Capella, I wouldn't be trying to compete with researchers in those traditional areas. I'd really be studying these kinds of things because there's nobody who really knows exactly what's going on, and nobody who really, because as you said, I mean, one of the problems with academia and trying to really look at this is that it's sort of in its own way about this, right? It's sort of like they're married to the methods, and we don't even know if the methods can cover what you and I are doing, right? So can you really effectively, can you sit down and interview me about what you and I are doing? If I were to sit down and talk to you, could you effectively get from me what you would need to do a qualitative study if you're not talking to me in this way, right? So in other words, I can sit down and talk to a researcher, but I don't even know if they could get from me what's actually happening right now using old methods.
I don't think we've reached that point, and I'm basing that on spending, I mean, what is it, like past 14 years collecting degrees, but I'm spending so much time with peers. I don't think there's this gap between two different worlds. I don't think we've fully crossed over. Like my professors thank me for giving insights on some of the stuff that's not being covered in the class, and not to say he's not covering.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. But on the flip side, people, what was it? And certainly can't go into this one. This would be like a 3-hour discussion, but what's the ROI on doing Twitter chats? And I even said to the guy, I said, I can't answer this in this class, not because I'm unwilling, but because that's like an article series that I actually have to take graphs and explain this. And, when does this turn into a sale? I mean, you get it, Charles, because you're in the internet marketing world. You've been in it as long as I have. It's just not a question that has a quick answer. But I told Mike, I said, I might as well be a Martian because I'm feeling like it's just not the same language. So other than my professor saying, hey, thank you so much for sharing this. And my response to a lot of it was, I'm not going to dirty the water, so to speak, by advertising my business. I'm trying to keep this separate, not because I don't want to have new clients or invite them, but because I think it's unfair for me to go into a classroom and, unless I'm the instructor or something, advertise what I'm doing offline. I think there needs to be some respect for other people, their businesses, the whole thing. But it's a very interesting experience. I'll say that. I don't think we've crossed over quite fully yet, but I think we will eventually, but it might take 10 years.
No, I agree
On that one. Wow, this has been an awesome conversation. I think, Charles, we should probably revisit the pricing, but obviously I was not reluctant to. It's been such a fun conversation. These are always fun conversations. You should ask Mike after I'm done with these marketing momentums. It's like, man, will you come down a couple notches because you're just too happy. But for those of you watching or listening, we'll revisit. How's that? We'll revisit the pricing. Because that's probably like 3 episodes right there. It's an interesting topic. So,
no, definitely.
Well, thanks for tuning in to Marketing Momentum with Charles and Deborah. And thank you, Charles.
Oh, thanks, Deb. Bye-bye, everybody.